It's a sham and a disgrace that they would take our former president, who will be our president in November, and try him like that.
I think it's the most corruption I've seen in my lifetime. I'm flabbergasted by the blatant corruption that's going on and political targeting.
Sounds like it's a kangaroo court. And if it's not thrown out, I'd be shocked.
Propaganda. I don't think it's much there. But as far as Trump himself, I mean, I didn't vote for him, not going to vote for him, don't too particularly care.
Americans from across the country weighing in on former President Trump's New York trial. Trump campaigning in the South Bronx yesterday as the so-called hush money trial is on pause after the Memorial holiday weekend. The jury is going to hear closing arguments starting next week. We expect those on Tuesday. So yesterday, the New York appellate court ruling against Trump on 2 decisions. The court refused a motion to move the trial out of Manhattan and refused to find that Justice Merchan improperly decided not to recuse himself from the case. Joining me now is attorney for President Trump, Will Scharf, who is on the president's appellate team. Will, so many questions for you. So obviously, this case is, we were going into closing arguments on Tuesday. It is going to stay in Manhattan despite best efforts. My question to you is, are you already working on a plan if President Trump is found guilty in a New York courtroom next week?
Well, first of all, we believe President Trump is going to be acquitted and that any fair jury would speedily acquit him for the simple reason that the prosecution has produced absolutely no evidence that President Trump did anything wrong, that he committed any crime. This is a case that should have never been brought in the first place. If there were to be a conviction, we would obviously speedily appeal that. We would expect any conviction to be quickly overturned on appeal because of the absolute dearth of evidence that the prosecution has introduced here, and also because of the many procedural irregularities that have occurred at basically every stage of this trial. So overall, what I would focus on here is the fact that the prosecution has clearly failed to meet its burden of proving its case beyond a reasonable doubt, and we hope the jury sees things that way. If they don't, we would obviously vigorously appeal any conviction in this case to vindicate President Trump's rights.
Well, obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about the lack of a case, but Alvin Bragg seems to have taken this case to a Manhattan courtroom knowing that it was in New York City and that this is a blue city. And they seem to be, and this is from many sources and many on-air commentators that have come on to Fox and said to us that Alvin Bragg believes he will get a conviction because it's New York. So the question is, when you go to appeal, do you take the judge's behavior? Is that what helps you the most on appeal? Is it Alvin Bragg's conduct or lack thereof in this case? Alvin Bragg not bringing enough evidence, not bringing the right evidence to the courtroom? I mean, what are the specifics that you believe you could win on appeal? And I only ask you because this could all unfold next week very quickly. Closing arguments are Tuesday.
Yeah, look, there are any number of issues that we would raise on appeal. Obviously, evidentiary sufficiency, the total dearth of evidence here is something that we would raise. Numerous trial decisions by Judge Merchan relating to what evidence he allowed in, what evidence he didn't allow in, what sorts of arguments he allowed to be made, what sorts of arguments he kept out of the courtroom. I think our change of venue motion, our motion to recuse Judge Merchan, those are all issues that would be vigorously raised in an appeal if a conviction would happen. But I completely disagree with the analysts that you just cited. I think that any fair jury would see through this sham of a case, and I'm hopeful that the jury seated in this case can look past any potential political issues, any potential political biases, and see this case for what it is, which is an absolutely baseless prosecution brought for fundamentally political, not legal reasons.
Well, the reason I ask you that is because why would Alvin Bragg bring something? I mean, the man is not dumb. Why bring something against the former president of the United States when your key witnesses, your star witnesses, are Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen, a convicted felon? So I think that those are fair questions, and that's why you have to wonder, why would Bragg do this? It's because he's banking on that New York jury. But also, you've got a couple of attorneys on that jury. We shall see. Next week is going to be a blockbuster in this case. I do want to move on to some other things with you because the former president did discuss the possibility of needing to appeal the final verdict in the New York trial. Watch what he said.
I love New York. This is where I grew up. I was born here. I grew up here. And And I see what's happening with this judicial system, and it's just, they call it all kangaroos, and we just can't have it. And I think the appellate courts can take care of a lot of things, but this one shouldn't even get to an appellate court. This should be an easy ruling, and it should really be, and I think it would be great for Judge Marchand to rule from the bench and to terminate this witch hunt.
Well, and I wanted to play that soundbite from the former president, Will, because also look at what happened in the Harvey Weinstein case here in New York. That was overturned.
Yeah, well, and we've had a lot of success with the appellate division in previous matters. They addressed in the civil enforcement action brought by AG Letitia James against President Trump. The appellate division overruled Judge Engoron 4 times. So we believe that ultimately the courts will get this right. The question is how much damage is done in the meantime. You asked why Alvin Bragg would bring a case like this. I think the answer is simple. Election interference and base political motivations, which should have no role whatsoever in a proceeding like this in any prosecution. I think this case is deeply offensive to core American notions of the rule of law, of the way that we're supposed to conduct elections in this country. This is a deeply, deeply offensive prosecution to me as a former prosecutor. And I believe that whether it's at trial through the jury or on appeal, ultimately President Trump will be vindicated.
Yeah. All right. Before you go, I do want to ask you about the Georgia case. So the Georgia State Senate Committee investigating misconduct by DA Fani Willis held another hearing yesterday. They heard testimony from a former Willis staffer. She says that she was demoted and then fired because she complained about misuse of funds. Willis did win her Democratic primary this week. But, Will, I do want to get your thoughts on how what we learned yesterday from that former employee of hers could impact Trump's Georgia case.
Well, look, I think Fani Willis is in more actual legal jeopardy than any of the defendants in that sham prosecution she brought down in Georgia. These allegations being raised are very, very serious. You're talking about misuse of federal funds, potentially criminal allegations against Fani Willis. We've obviously seen misconduct from her and her team throughout the pendency of this prosecution. That obviously blew up in her face with the Nathan Wade revelations. That's her lover/prosecutor that was originally brought in to handle this case before he was kicked off of it. We're hopeful that the Georgia appellate courts similarly disqualify Fani Willis because of how irretrievably conflicted she is in this matter. And I would hope that criminal prosecutors with jurisdiction to consider her many criminal actions would take a long, hard look at potentially bringing her to justice for them.
Yeah. Will Scharf, we'd love to have you back as soon as you're available. Will, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Great to be with you. Thanks a lot.